The German Panthers were closing in fast, and inside a battered American Sherman, the gunner froze. His gun sight had snapped clean off after the last hit. No optics, no crosshair, nothing. The commander yelled, "We fire or we die." So the gunner did something insane. He pressed his eye to the empty metal bracket where the sight used to be and aimed by feel. No calculations, just instinct and timing. The first Panther appeared between the trees. He fired. Direct hit. The turret blew off. Another Panther swung its gun toward them. He fired again. Second hit. Now the German column panicked. One after another, Panthers tried to flank, but the gunner kept firing blind, adjusting only from the recoil and the flash of enemy guns. 6 minutes later, 11 German Panthers were burning, and the Sherman crew sat in stunned silence. The commander whispered, "With a broken sight, he shot better than a machine."
A Mustang pilot figures out an impossible turn that Luftwaffe pilots didn't understand. 14 September 1944. Somewhere over Eastern Europe, 18,000 feet above a patchwork of farmland and forest, Lieutenant James Lucky Morrison knew he was about to die. His P-51 Mustang, christened Devil's Daughter by his ground crew, had been bleeding oil for the past 20 minutes. The engine temperature gauge was climbing steadily into the red zone. Worse still, his radio had taken a stray round during the bombing escort mission, leaving him deaf to his squadron's warnings. He was alone, separated from his formation by a wall of clouds and his own carelessness in pursuing what he thought was a crippled German bomber. It had been a trap. Now, as he emerged from the cloud bank at 15,000 feet, Morrison's blood turned to ice. Arranged in a deadly crescent formation ahead and above him were 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s, their yellow noses gleaming in the afternoon sun like the beaks of hunting falcons. These weren't ordinary Luftwaffe pilots. The intricate kill markings on their fuselages told the story. He was facing elements of Jagdishwar 52, home to some of Germany's deadliest aces. 24 years old, with only 7 confirmed kills to his name, Morrison was staring at pilots who had collectively downed over 400 Allied aircraft. Men who had learned their deadly craft over the skies of Spain, Poland, France, and now the Eastern Front. Men who had forgotten more about aerial combat than Morrison would ever know. The lead Messerschmitt waggled its wings. Morrison understood the gesture. It was the old chivalric code, a relic from the Great War that still occasionally surfaced in this mechanized slaughter. A salute before the kill. Morrison's hands tightened on the control stick. His instructors at flight school had drilled it into every cadet. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you run. Break formation, dive for the deck. Use every ounce of your aircraft's power to escape. Live to fight another day. But Morrison's all-starved engine was already coughing, his airspeed dropping. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't outclimb them. And in 30 seconds, when they finished their positioning, he couldn't outfight them. Unless an insane idea flickered through his mind. Something his instructor, a grizzled veteran of the Battle of Britain, had mentioned once during a late-night bull session in the officers' club. Not a tactic, exactly. More of a desperate gamble that defied every principle of aerial combat. His instructor had called it the madman's waltz, and he'd only heard of it being attempted successfully once, by a French pilot in 1940. The German fighters were positioning for their attack runs now, splitting into elements. 6 would attack from above, 6 from the flanks. Standard doctrine. They would converge on him like the fingers of a closing fist, their combined firepower creating an inescapable cone of destruction. Morrison took a deep breath. His father, a pastor in rural Michigan, had always said that when facing the impossible, a man needed 3 things: courage, faith, and a touch of holy madness. Lucky Morrison figured he was about to find out if the old man was right. Chapter 1. The Dance of Death. The first pair of Messerschmitt's dove from 6 o'clock high, their machine guns chattering. Tracers laced the air around Morrison's Mustang like threads of deadly light. He waited, 1 second, 2 seconds, counting in his head the way his instructor had taught him, feeling the rhythm of the attack. 3 seconds. Now. Morrison yanked the control stick hard right and simultaneously chopped his throttle to nearly idle. The Mustang, already struggling with its damaged engine, seemed to stop midair. In that split second of controlled stall, he snap-rolled the aircraft left, the opposite direction from his initial turn, while kicking the rudder pedals in a vicious cross-control that would have made his flight instructors weep. The P-51 spun like a drunken dancer, losing altitude in a corkscrew that violated every aerodynamic principle Morrison had ever been taught. It was the most uncoordinated, ugly, physics-defying maneuver ever attempted by a fighter pilot. It was also completely unpredictable. The two attacking Messerschmitts screamed past, their pilots' carefully calculated deflection shots missing by yards. They hadn't anticipated their target essentially hanging in midair, rotating through 3 axes simultaneously. By all rights, Morrison should have entered an unrecoverable spin, a death spiral that would have screwed him into the ground. But Morrison wasn't done. As the Mustang fell through 14,000 feet, still in its chaotic tumble, Morrison fed in opposite rudder and eased the stick forward. The aircraft shuddered, protested, and then, miraculously, started to respond. He nursed the throttle back up, coaxing the dying engine to give him just a few more minutes of power. The second pair of German fighters was already committed to their attack run. They'd positioned based on where Morrison should have been after the first attack, directly in front of them, desperate and predictable. Instead, Morrison's insane tumbling maneuver had dropped him 2,000 feet and put him in a completely different piece of sky. The Germans' carefully aimed burst of cannon fire shredded empty air. "Come on, you bastard," Morrison muttered to his aircraft, pulling out of the dive at 12,000 feet. The engine was screaming now, temperature gauge pegged at maximum. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before it ceased completely. The German formation, momentarily disrupted by his impossible maneuver, was already reorganizing. Morrison could see them through his canopy, splitting into new attack elements. These were professionals. They weren't rattled by one surprising move. They would adjust, adapt, and kill him. But now Morrison had something he didn't have before. He'd bought himself 30 seconds and planted a seed of doubt in his attackers' minds. They'd expected an easy kill. Instead, they'd gotten something they couldn't quite classify, a pilot who flew like he was having a nervous breakdown, whose aircraft movements made no tactical sense. The lead Messerschmitt came at him head-on, the deadliest form of fighter attack. Gun muzzles sparked along its wings. Morrison could see the pilot's face through the canopy, hard and focused. Morrison pushed his screaming engine to full throttle and did something that made even less sense than his first maneuver. Instead of braking left or right, instead of diving or climbing, he flew straight at the German fighter while simultaneously rolling his Mustang inverted and pulling back on the stick. To the German pilot, it must have looked like Morrison was going to ram him upside down. In reality, Morrison was executing what fighter pilots call a split S, but starting from the wrong position, at the wrong altitude, with a dying engine, and directly into an enemy's guns. The geometry of the situation broke the German's nerve. At 400 miles per hour, with only a second to react, The Messerschmitt pilot flinched and broke right, his burst of cannon fire passing beneath Morrison's inverted aircraft. Morrison completed the split S, rolling upright as he dove, the Mustang's nose pointing straight at the ground. J-forces crushed him into his seat, darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. The altimeter unwound like a clock spinning backward, 11,000 feet, 10,000, 9,000. Behind and above him, the German formation was in confusion. Their carefully orchestrated attack had dissolved into a furball, with fighters scattered across several thousand feet of altitude. They'd been expecting a battle. What they'd gotten was chaos. Morrison pulled out of his dive at 7,000 feet, his vision tunneling, his body feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The Mustang's frame groaned in protest, rivets popping from the stress. But she held together, barely. The Germans were regrouping, but now they were cautious. Morrison had done the impossible twice. He'd evaded 12 of Germany's best pilots through maneuvers that seemed to defy logic. They were reassessing. But Morrison knew his luck, and his engine was running out. The temperature gauge had gone beyond red into a zone that had no markings. White smoke was beginning to stream from the engine cowling. He had one, maybe two more maneuvers before the engine ceased, and then he'd be a gliding coffin. The third wave came at him from his 4 o'clock position, to fighters working in perfect coordination, a classic high-low split. The high man would force Morrison to break downward, directly into the guns of the low man. It was textbook, efficient, and nearly impossible to counter. Nearly. Morrison waited until they were committed, until both pilots had their fingers on their triggers, until the physics of their attack runs made it impossible for them to adjust. Then he did something that would be talked about in fighter pilot bars for the next 50 years. He reversed his throttle completely, pulling it back to idle and deploying his flaps in combat, something expressly forbidden in every training manual ever written. The Mustang, already struggling, virtually stopped in midair, dropping like a stone through the Germans' carefully calculated firing solutions. But Morrison wasn't done. As he fell, he simultaneously yanked the stick hard left while stomping on the right rudder pedal. The aircraft entered what pilots call an accelerated stall, with one wing stalling before the other. The Mustang snap-rolled violently, spinning end over end in a flat rotation that looked more like a falling leaf than a controlled maneuver. The two German fighters shot past on either side, their tracers creating an X pattern in the space where Morrison had been a heartbeat before. Morrison, fighting the controls with every ounce of his strength, managed to recover from the stall at 5,000 feet. His hands were shaking, his flight suit soaked with sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures. The engine was making a sound like a dying animal, metallic clanging mixed with a high-pitched whine that meant catastrophic bearing failure. Above him, the German formation was no longer a formation. 12 fighters were scattered across 5,000 feet of altitude, their carefully orchestrated attack dissolved. Their carefully orchestrated attack dissolved into individual frustration. They'd never seen anything like this. Morrison wasn't fighting them, he was confounding them, using maneuvers that were technically possible but tactically insane. The lead German pilot, a veteran with over 80 kills to his name, made a decision. He'd seen enough. This American pilot was either the luckiest fool in the war or a tactical genius masquerading as a madman. Either way, continuing the attack against such an unpredictable opponent was wasteful and dangerous. They'd already wasted ammunition, altitude, and cohesion. The mission was compromised. He waggled his wings, the signal to break off the attack, and turned northeast, toward home. One by one, the other Messerschmitts followed. Morrison didn't believe it at first. He kept his eyes locked on the departing Germans, waiting for the trick, the feint. But they kept going, their yellow-nosed fighters growing smaller against the darkening sky. Chapter 3. At the landing. Morrison's engine finally ceased completely at 3,000 feet, the propeller windmilling uselessly. The sudden silence was deafening. He was 20 miles behind enemy lines, with no power, no radio, and no idea where his own forces were. He trimmed the Mustang for best gliding speed and searched the ground below. There, a partially harvested wheat field, maybe a mile long. It would have to do. The landing was rough. The Mustang bounced twice, the landing gear nearly collapsing, before skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust and wheat chaff. Morrison sat in the cockpit for a long moment, his hands still gripping the control stick, his body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. He was alive. Against 12 of Germany's best pilots, with a dying aircraft and no backup, he'd survived. Not by outflying them, he wasn't good enough for that. Not by outgunning them, he hadn't fired a single shot. But by being so utterly, completely unpredictable that they couldn't build a firing solution on him. Later, after he'd been rescued by a Polish resistance patrol and made it back to his base 3 days later, Morrison's debriefing became the stuff of legend. Intelligence officers listened in stunned silence as he described his maneuvers. His squadron commander, a by-the-book colonel who would flown in North Africa, didn't know whether to court-martial him or recommend him for the Medal of Honor. "Lieutenant," the colonel said finally, "what you did violated every principle of aerial combat. Those maneuvers should have killed you a dozen different ways." "Yes, sir," Morrison replied. But they didn't know that. And more importantly, they couldn't predict it. When you're outmatched, sometimes the only winning move is to stop playing the same game. The colonel stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the luckiest fool in the Army Air Force." Morrison grinned. "Why not both, sir?" The story of Lucky Morrison's encounter with the 12 German aces spread through the 8th Air Force like wildfire. Pilots who would never met him bought him drinks. Ground crews painted his impossible maneuvers on the noses of their aircraft like folk art. Intelligence officers tried to codify what he'd done into training doctrine, but they couldn't. How do you teach controlled chaos? The German pilots, for their part, never spoke publicly about that day. But intelligence intercepts revealed that a new warning had been added to Luftwaffe briefings in that sector: beware the wounded American. They fight without sense or fear. Morrison flew 32 more combat missions before the war ended. He never again faced odds like that September afternoon, and he never again attempted those particular maneuvers. He didn't need to. The legend was enough. Enemy pilots who heard his call sign, Lucky 77, on the radio often broke off their attacks, unwilling to risk facing the pilot who would defeat the aces of J.G. Bavan. Years later, at a reunion of Army Air Force veterans, a reporter asked Morrison what had really happened that day. How had he, a relatively inexperienced pilot, survived against 12 of Germany's elite? Morrison, grey-haired and grandfatherly by then, took a long sip of his beer before answering. "I'll tell you the truth," he said. "I was terrified. Every maneuver I made, I was sure would be my last. But I realized something up there in that sky. Those German pilots were masters of aerial combat. They'd studied every tactic, practiced every maneuver, fought in every theater. They knew exactly how to kill a fighter pilot. He paused, his eyes distant, looking at something only he could see. But I figured out that all that knowledge, all that experience, it was also a limitation. They knew what pilots could do, should do. So I did what they couldn't predict. I did what no pilot should do. I threw out the rulebook and flew like a man with nothing to lose. Were you scared? The reporter asked. Morrison laughed, a sound tinged with the memory of terror. Scared? Son, I've never been so terrified in my life. But fear has a funny way of clearing your head, of making you see the one path through the impossible. Those 12 German aces, they were hunting a fighter pilot. What they found instead was a desperate man in a broken airplane willing to do impossible things. He raised his glass in a toast to the empty air. To the sky, he said softly, where the impossible is just physics we haven't learned yet. And to the pilots on both sides who danced that deadly dance. Some of us got lucky. Many didn't. But for a few minutes on that September day, the sky belonged to nobody, not to the aces, not to the rookie, just to the mad dance of survival. The reporter published the story, and it became one of the most famous tales of aerial combat from the war. But Morrison knew the real truth, the thing he never told anyone. He'd been preparing to bail out when he saw